Hi guys, this lecture is really kind of just covering what I want you to do for the last segment of our MLA unit, and I'm going to go over the assignment sheet for the MLA profession analysis paper. I'm not going to look at an entire example, but I'm going to let you know where to find one and then talk a little bit just about some of the pros and cons of the example that I have for you. I'm going to read through this assignment sheet that you see on your screen. I certainly want you to read through it as well, and you can find it linked in the FYI section for this week. I will talk a little bit about what I want you to do. I'll elaborate on the assignment here, and then I'll talk about some big questions that people usually have for this essay, especially regarding the difference between the paper itself and what we wrote for our research proposal. Alright, so I'm just going to get into it. I'm going to read it, and I'll pause throughout reading this assignment sheet and let you know more details. Alright, MLA profession analysis essay. It's 200 points. Prompt and instructions in a fully researched MLA formatted essay that is 2,500 to 3,800 words in length. And this can include your works cited page. I'm going to pause here for a second and just talk about that. So the second example scene suggestion and accuracy argument paragraph that we looked at for the research proposal, that was the example where I covered the movie Chocolate, however you want me to say that. Those two paragraphs were 400 words. So I feel like I've calculated this for you guys before, but if we take this word count and then we look really quickly at my penalty down here, so for every 100 words below the 2,500 word minimum, that means that it would be perfectly fine for you to write 2,401 words, because that would only be 99 words below the minimum, and I wouldn't take off any points for 99 words, but I would for 100. So that's 2,401 words. If your document showed that at the bottom, you can probably deduct somewhere between 150 to 200 words for your works cited page. I'm going to go on the low end of that and subtract 150, which means the content of your paper should be about 2,250 words, something like that, 2,250 words. If you assume sort of a standard, I guess, with your introduction being about 150 words and your conclusion being about 150 words, then the body of your paper should be 1,951 words at a minimum, assuming all of the rest of your assignment is well developed. So if I divide that by 400, then that gives me 4.87. So I'm going to round that up to 5. So it looks like if you have some really nicely developed, not too long, but decent sized paragraphs for each scene suggestion and argument analysis pair, then you're looking at needing to cover about 5 different topics or ideas from your primary source, whether that's your movie or your TV show, which I guess if I were going to paraphrase that or put it in a way that would make the most sense to me, I would say find 5 scenes that cover different things. You wouldn't want to find 5 scenes of someone just filing papers, but 5 scenes of different things to talk about. And when I look at your research proposals, if your scene suggestion paragraph covers multiple topics, I will, in my feedback for you guys, let you know, hey, I think you could break this up into a couple of paragraphs, and that can give you some fuel for getting that word count, because I think that's the thing that most students are apprehensive of, and it can, because it's a long paper, sometimes it can make people not want to do it and push it off to the last minute because it's overwhelming. I totally understand that. That's super valid, but just know that the more content you can think of now, the easier it'll be for you to get that word count, because it's really, meeting the word count is about developing your argument and really supporting the ideas that you're saying in your thesis statement. So while I start with word count, don't let that intimidate you. Just know that you're looking at needing to assess about 5 ideas. In a fully researched MLA formatted essay, argue as to how accurately one or two fictional movies or one fictional television series depicts a character or profession, or a career or profession of your choice. And so you've been working on this the whole time. I don't really think I need to explain too much here. Support your argument with specific, detailed scenes and dialogue from the movie or TV series, and with research documentation to prove your points. And that research documentation can be things like all of the sources you found, professional handbooks, textbooks, scholarly articles, blogs, any other non-scholarly articles and magazines. Someone asked me, for the research proposal, do the sources have to be the same types of sources I required for the annotated bibliography? And I imagine that question might carry over into this paper. Does it have to be only sources from an expert or scholarly or from a book or credible websites? No, certainly not. But of course, the more credible your sources, the better your argument and the more grounds you have to stand on when you're writing your claims. So just keep that in mind, I think. But that doesn't mean there's not really valid sources out there that are going to help you prove your points. Your essay must incorporate one or two primary sources, of course, your movie or TV series. You've already figured that part out. And then additionally, your essay, your paper, whatever you want to think of it as, should include 6 secondary sources. One of those I do want you to use a book, and one of those I do want you to use a scholarly article. So I guess in terms of required source types, I'm loosening up from the annotated bibliography, but it's still pretty, there's still a requirement of the type of sources I want to use here. At least one book and at least one scholarly article. And you can use those in any way that you want. You can use them to support your argument. You can find an article, a scholarly article, for example, that is saying the opposite of what you want to say, and you can bounce off of that. You can use it to fuel your argument. You can even talk about other ideas. If you're introducing this concept, you can just reference really quickly a scholarly article that maybe analyzes a different movie or TV show, and again talk about how that provided a little subtle message of that fueling your argument. And if those are my suggestions if you're not sure how you should incorporate a scholarly article, or if you're having a hard time finding a good scholarly article that's going to support your ideas. With scholarly articles, the thing I always remembered or tried to remember or think of when I was in grad school is I don't have to use every bit of detail from the scholarly article, just whatever is relevant for me. Yeah. Okay. Here's an example thesis statement. While Grey's Anatomy is one of the most popular television series of the past 10 years, its depiction of the nursing profession gives audiences a false sense of the relationship between nurses and doctors. So that tells me that the majority of the paper is going to cover this relationship between nurses and doctors. I could have gone even one step further in this example thesis to kind of list out my talking points. That's fine if that's something that you're familiar with and you want to do. But if you just want to keep it like what I call an umbrella thesis, an overarching overview thesis, that's fine too. Requirements and penalties. Of course, MLA format, 2,500 words, but for every 100 words below the minimum, I'll take off 5 points. So I don't think it's as bad. I used to be really bad about it. I used to take off 10 points for every 50 words or something, but that was mean. For each missing source from the total count, 5 points will be subtracted from the final grade. So remember, if you have to have 6 secondary sources and then you also have to cite your primary source, you're at least, at a bare minimum, going to see 7 citations on your works cited page. So keep that number in your head. I think that a lot of students in the past, when they look at the assignment sheet really quickly, kind of like, oh, did I do everything I need to do? They say the number 6. They count their secondary source, or they count all of their sources, and they say, okay, I've got 6 sources, I'm good to go. But that 6 includes their primary source, whereas on the assignment sheet, I'm asking for 6 secondary sources. So on your works cited page, you want to make sure you have at least 7 sources. The only reason that number 4 is even in the requirement and penalties here is because I've had this experience in the past. So I really don't expect it, but I've put it here because it's just frustrating to come across, so I really want to highlight that it's not something you should do. So number 4 says if the annotated bibliography is copied as the works cited page in order to kind of fluff the word count, and so that would mean including those paragraph annotations, then I will take off 20 points. What I mean is if I see an essay and it's like 4 pages or so, and then I see an annotated bibliography, like the original annotated bibliography, copy and pasted. A works cited page and an annotated bibliography are not the same thing, because an annotated bibliography is the citations but with that paragraph annotation, whereas a works cited page is just the citations that you've used in your paper. So I did have some students in the past, not happen very often, but they knew that they needed to have that word count, so they just added their annotated bibliography. And I don't know if it was confusion or if it was just a way to try and trick the system. So that's why I have this here. I don't expect anyone to ever really have an issue with it, but it's here. You'll turn it in on Moodle. It's due on March 10th. I also have the rubric down here for you. Someone in my other class was asking me about this sentence variety section of the rubric, so I'll comment on that really quickly. It's really just an easy 2 points to earn. I have it here in case I have an essay that is extremely simplistic and formulaic. I can't even think of an example off the top of my head to say to you here, but what I will say to my entire class, here right now, you guys, your writing is not simplistic. It's advanced, it's exceptional, it's very good. You all will not have any issues with sentence variety. So I am certain you'll all earn these 2 points here. I believe that the rubric is the last thing. So I want to talk a little bit about some concepts that usually come up in my face-to-face class regarding this paper. One of those is, do we have to use all of the sources on our annotated bibliography in our paper? No, I'm never going to go back and look at your annotated bibliography. That is in the past for me. If you said you are absolutely going to use this source and this is how you're going to use it, and it never comes up in your paper and you don't cite it on your works cited page, that's fine. I'm not even going to know. The other thing that I get a lot of questions on is, do I have to do an scene suggestion paragraph and an accuracy argument paragraph, and then a scene suggestion paragraph and an accuracy argument paragraph, and a scene suggestion, and so on and so forth? Does it have to be like that for every single one? And do those 2 paragraphs have to be broken up? Like, what do I have to do here? And the structural requirements loosen up a lot in this paper. So while I personally, I would probably, if I was a student, follow that structure, because for me it's formulaic, it's very logical, it's rhythmic, and I like that in my own writing. It's not necessary, and it doesn't mean that if you don't follow that your writing is bad. So there's a lot of options, and there's a lot of really effective options to writing. Make sure that the goal of your paper and the goal of this project is administered in your assignment, that it's found in your assignment. So you're analyzing accuracy of a profession in some movie or television show. And make sure that you're following basic essay writing structures: introduction, body paragraphs, conclusion. Your body paragraphs begin with topic sentences, have supporting details, and end on concluding sentences, and transition. You have transitions throughout, you have developed paragraphs, but it doesn't have to be so formulaic as you found in your research proposal. Some things that I have had students in the past do is maybe put 2 scene suggestion paragraphs back to back, because that accuracy argument paragraph the sources are so intertwined that the student has to take into consideration 2 separate scenes, and not 2 scenes that are like tightly linked where you could use them in the same paragraph, but really 2 separate ideas. But in order to talk about accuracy, the student has to address 2 separate ideas at the same time. So if you find that seems to be your goal or something you have to do, that's perfectly fine. You can do that. I've even had students who maybe are covering a really minute, like super small aspect of their show or their movie, and so they feel like maybe there's only a sentence or 2 to talk about in that scene suggestion part. So they feel like it makes more sense for them to merge the scene suggestion, the little bit of it, with like a more developed accuracy argument all into one paragraph, and that's fine too. You can certainly do that. So again, as long as your assignment is following the conventions of academic writing, then you should be good. I'm sorry, that's my dog in the background, guys. So that's fine. You can do that. Sorry, my dog kind of threw me off here. So structurally, you have a lot of ideas, or you have a lot of options. I guess the other thing that I want to talk about is just regarding the example that I have for you. And this is also linked in the FYI section of our week 6 in Moodle. I'm not going to read through this because y'all would pause the video here and never come back. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about it and some pros and cons. My student who wrote this a couple of years ago, it's okay, buddy. She wrote about Nurse Jackie. She talked about accuracy. Her thesis, let's see. Due to the risk factors for drug addiction that nurses are exposed to and the easy access to prescription opioids, Nurse Jackie does accurately portray the life of a nurse who is dealing with a drug addiction. So she's really focusing in her paper on the drug addiction component, and in her paper she explores even things like would it be accurate for a nurse to have family and friends do an intervention? Does that necessarily cover the profession itself, or more so what it's like to be maybe a drug addict? I think there's some gray area there, but the student's structure of her paper and overall the paper did exactly what the goals of this assignment are asking for. So it's an excellent piece of writing. It's academically written. It's really nicely done, but there are some cons, I think, in that way where the paper kind of goes off from the overall concept in every single paragraph, but it brings it back around together at the end. There are some questionable sentences that aren't the most beautiful, but all writing has that, I think. So those are the cons. The pros are that it structurally follows, for me at least, the scene suggestion accuracy argument. And you'll notice that she has some paragraphs where those 2 things are blended together, and also where you might get a whole discussion of accuracy, maybe 2 paragraphs in a row, or a whole discussion of scenes 2 paragraphs in a row. She doesn't 100% adhere to that scene accuracy, scene accuracy, scene accuracy structure that I might if I were a student, but the paper is nicely done. I think, I'm trying to remember, but I want to say overall her paper was about 2,700 words, and she incorporates, I believe, more than the required 6 secondary sources. So her paper itself is just over 7 pages, and then her works cited page 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, has 15 sources on it, but some of those are her citing out each individual episode that she's looking at from the show. And that's possibly what adds to her word count. But her total page count is about, I think, 11 pages. So if you have the opportunity to read through this, I would. I do it in my face-to-face classes. I have students kind of do round robin, and we read this, and we just talk about the pros and cons. So if you are going to read it and you have any questions about it, let me know. Some things I want to talk about really quickly before I end this video are how do you approach the paper now that you've written your research proposal? And really I guess the important question is, what can I use from my research proposal in my final paper? And there are some things you can, and there are some things you can't. So you can certainly use your thesis statement. You can use your research question, as long as you didn't say I anywhere in your research question, which you likely did. You can use the summary that you wrote in your introduction in your paper. So keep it. You can use, obviously, your scene and your accuracy paragraphs. The things you can't use is anywhere where you're talking about why you did what you did, or anything where you're talking about your goals or you yourself. So if you're saying I anywhere in the research proposal, which there are certainly tons of places where you would be that I ask you to, those are the things you can't use. So that would be the reason you chose this paper. That would be probably the first thing you wrote in your introduction. Can't use that. That would be things like who your audience is, what your purpose is for writing the research that you've done. You don't want to talk about that. That's not the place. The place for that is your research proposal, not your final paper. The introduction you wrote for your research proposal will not be the same introduction that you have for your final paper. What you want to make sure that you do in your introduction for your final paper is address not only your profession, but also your TV show or your movie. I have a lot of students who will just talk about one or the other, and then by the time I get to the thesis statement, it's really surprising, because let's say, for example, I have a student who's only writing about what it's like to be a police officer, and then I get to this thesis statement that talks about some police procedural movie. I'm like, why are we analyzing a movie? What's happening here? So you want to make sure that you bring them both up in your introduction. Introduce your paper and your argument the way that you would normally write, and forget about the research proposal's introduction. It's a totally different thing. I have had people start their final paper just by copying and pasting their whole research proposal, but it's just an awkward, it's not what I'm looking for. I don't want to hear your research proposal all over again, just the relevant bits. You can use essentially the last two paragraphs of your research proposal, and I would say if you intend to do that, wait until you get my feedback before you start working on those paragraphs, so you can revise them and improve them, and go from there. Well, I think that pretty much covers everything, you guys. I don't want to make this video longer than it needs to be. So if you have questions, obviously post them in the discussion this week, or if they're important and you need the answer right away, send me an email, or do both. It doesn't matter. But I am here to help. This paper can be challenging, so really if you need anything at all, just send me an email.